So we spoke about how cold it is here, and actually, I'm actually kind of hot because I just got in last night from Minneapolis, and it was 3. So that's going from 60 to 90, is just to put it in perspective, all right? So it's kind of warm for me. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you all this morning. This is a talk that I normally takes about an hour to go through, so I'm going to speed date with you this morning and go through a few things that Insight has learned from our clients across the world. So in the future, one of the things that we're looking at, is that there's going to be a multi-cloud. We're going to have on-premises stuff and then one of the hyperscalers. That's the way the world is going to look, all right? People that are saying that it's all going to go to the cloud, that's actually something that we're seeing that's not happening anymore. There are some smaller organizations that are going all cloud, but larger organizations are going into a hybrid cloud. And they're behaving differently. So I'm not going to read the words in here because it would take me all 15 minutes to do this. But if you have a chance, look up an organization called CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Their website is cncf.io. If you go there, they'll give you a good definition of what it is to do on-premises cloud computing. And that might sound kind of weird, but that's actually the trend that we're seeing in the industry, is that people that were doing cloud that are going to the cloud are now trying to do the same thing on premises. And what's really happening is data has anybody seen these two pictures before? These are very famous articles that have, one's a book and one's an article. The Economist about 2 years ago published that the world's most valuable resource is data, all right? If you look at the biggest companies in the world today, it's all about the data. So Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, Amazon, all of them, it's all about the data. That's really what they sell. And the other book, if you have a chance, you should pick it up, is by a gentleman by the name of Stephen O'Grady. It's The New Kingmakers. And it's about how the developers have really ruled the world, start ruling the world now. And what you have to do is marry those two things together. Focus on the developers and worry about the data. That's really what you got to do, all right? So the trends that we're seeing is that innovation tends to happen in the cloud providers. All of the public cloud providers are spending inordinate amounts of money in the public cloud. I just spent some time with Google. They spend, on average, $5 billion a quarter on infrastructure, $5 billion. Microsoft spends more, and Amazon spends even more than that. So imagine that. That's just, there's no way anybody else is going to keep up with that kind of level of investment or innovation. So if you want to do innovation, you're probably going to be able to do it better in the public cloud. That's just the way it is, all right? Smaller organizations are not going to be able to keep up with this stuff as well. So we're seeing smaller organizations move to the public cloud, and that's probably the right thing. But there's some things that you need to worry about if you do that. Small to mid-sized organizations are trying to move to the cloud, but it turns out that using the cloud is not very simple, and it requires different skills. And finding those skills is really, really hard. In fact, when we try to move some of our own architects to the cloud, they gave up. These are really, really smart guys that said, I can't figure this out. This is really hard, all right? But it turns out we still need them on premises, so it's all good. So what these mid-sized organizations are really focusing on is hybrid cloud, where you run some of your workloads in the public cloud and you run some of your workloads on premises. Very large organizations, the very biggest of our organizations around the world, are actually decided that they are going to do hybrid cloud, but they're going to build a private cloud. And the private cloud is going to behave like the public cloud, so that their developers will choose the right place depending on the workload, but they will feel the same regardless of where they go choose it, all right? And that's the big distinction. Because if you build a private cloud, you got to make it feel like. You won't innovate like the Googles and the Amazons, but you can make it feel like the Googles and the Amazons, all right? And no matter what you do, legacy exists. Especially in a crowd like this, we know that some systems are going to be around for 30, 50 years, and you got to accommodate for that stuff. So, speaking of data, it has some interesting attributes. It's easy to create vast amounts of it. And in fact, you heard in the private speaker that you're instrumenting everything out there. You're putting sensors in buses, you're putting sensors in street corners, you're putting sensors everywhere. So you're creating vast troves of data. And it's actually easy to store it. You just got to buy some storage. That's cheap, all right? But it's very hard to move it. If you start storing it somewhere, you're probably going to keep storing it there forever. Just remember that. You're buying into some technical debt if you decide, wherever you decide you're going to put it, that's where it's probably going to live forever. So just remember that. And it's also very hard to analyze. So there's a lot of talk right now about artificial intelligence. If you look at it, most use cases of artificial intelligence are around data analysis. So there's a much longer version of this talk where I get into that into quite a bit of detail. But that's really what AI is built around. It's mathematical algorithms that help you analyze data better. Could be pictures, could be voice recordings, it could be whatever data that you have in your data sets. But that's really what it does. Once you've built something, it's really hard to recreate it somewhere else. So say you build a police video storage system. You could buy it as a service. You can do that from Axon or one of those kinds of guys, or you could build it yourself. Wherever you end up putting that, that's where it's going to live, right? And it's going to live there forever. So just remember that. And once it starts moving in that direction, it'll tend to move in that direction forever as well. So you've probably heard of data gravity. That's the term that everything centers around the data. Data has inertia also. It's really hard to redirect it somewhere else. And, all right. I'm not sure what my next slide is. Oh, there we go. All right. So all of this data stuff has created silos of data, duplicated data all over the place, troubles in moving to the cloud because data is really hard to move. Once you've selected a cloud, it's also really hard to move to another cloud, all right? And in the enterprise, and the commercial enterprise, there's an interesting behavior that we're seeing that might end up happening here is that the big cloud providers are competing with each other, but they're also competing against the market. So you're seeing some of the cloud providers getting into banking. Google just announced that they're going to start getting into banking yesterday. Amazon just announced that they're releasing or opening a grocery store in San Francisco next year. So all of these companies that might have been doing business with these guys now have to figure out how to move the data from one to the other, and it's turning out. It's really hard. It's like the Roach Motel. Once you get in, you can't get out. And they're finding out that moving back from cloud is actually really hard. And backup, the cybersecurity conversation in one detail, is extremely hard. So I pressed the button. I should get used to doing it ahead of time. Negative. All right. So there's an interesting thing that's also happened. VMware took over the world about 15 years ago, or starting 15 years ago, the virtualization trend. There's another trend that's happening now with containerization. It was led by Docker, but it's a much richer ecosystem now. And then Kubernetes is the orchestration framework that's managing that stuff. Seems to be the one that's won. The reason that one has become much more... Sorry. Can you just hit next for me? Thank you. Ha! So it's not working for you? It's waiting for connection now. Oh, on this one. All right. So I think we went and skipped a couple slides. All right, there we go, cloud native. So the containerization thing has actually led to what's called now cloud native thing. And that's one of the reasons it was developed. Cloud native, the key concept in cloud native is that everything is considered code. And that means the infrastructure itself. So I grew up as an infrastructure system administrator. I worked for Georgia Tech. And we used to just manage and write scripts and Unix this and Windows that and all that other good stuff. But what I didn't have is a version control system. So if I made a change to something, I had to record it somewhere, right? So what developers have done now, remember the developers are the kings now, is they want to consider the infrastructure itself as code as well. And what they do is they document any changes to the infrastructure the same way they document any changes to the code that they write. So there's a big term amongst the vendors out there is software defined. You've probably heard that running around. Most of them are throwing it around egregiously wrong. They tell you it's software defined, but they just sell you software. And that's incorrect. What they should be telling you is that I have a version control system that allows me to define what my infrastructure looks like, so that when I write my code, I know that it ran on this very specific infrastructure in this very specific format, all right? And if I break something, I can go back and I can not only update my code, but I can make my infrastructure look like it did before. So that's what software defined should mean, all right? And demand that of your vendors, by the way. So, and it applies to the app, the network, the security, the storage, all of that stuff. And this is the key thing that the public cloud does right. That's why developers really like the public cloud, all right? So, I'm getting the 2-minute thing, all right. So, message for you is if you can't commit to a version control system, it's not software defined. So what does that all mean? Recognize that the data is a fundamental IT concern. You gotta worry about the data, it's number one, top. All right, and that includes security, data protection, all that other stuff. Recognize that development is the heartbeat of modern IT. The developers are really, truly the kings. Bring compute to the data. I can't stress that enough. Moving the data around so you can compute on it better is you're doing it wrong. All right, bring compute to the data. And design the new systems to accommodate both old and the new. I was just at a enterprise advisory board with one of our large partners. And an interesting thing came out from these very large enterprises that were in there. They did the math. The public cloud costs them 3 to 5x more to consume than the private infrastructure. So what they're all doing is they're moving any new innovation, stuff that's non-differentiated, not core IP to their business, to the public cloud because it's easier to innovate. Stuff that they know how to manage very well, they're building their own private cloud because they can do cost control on it much better. So consider that as you start thinking about what you're going to use the public cloud for. It is awesome for innovation. It is not awesome for cost control. All right? And 4 simple rules. This deck, by the way, I'll leave you my contact info as the last slide. This deck is actually much, much longer, and there's some nerdy details that go behind these 4 details. Happy to send it out to y'all. Can you tell I live in Atlanta? I said y'all. These 4 simple rules actually have some detail behind them that you should probably pass on to your nerds, like me. On-premises requires fundamentally sound design. The on-premises stuff is still going to be hard regardless of what we do. Public cloud requires an adoption of new patterns. We use that term very specifically because you got to think about it differently. It is the developer mentality. Private cloud needs a developer-centric approach. We talked about that. And hybrid cloud, if you're going to do that, requires either an abstraction layer, something that translates from public to private, or an agnostic platform, something that can live both on-premises and the hybrid. And Kubernetes is a platform, so that's just by way of saying what I'm thinking. All right, so about Insight, in case you're not familiar with us, we're a pretty large organization. There's about $9.5 billion in sales. Hold on. I'm gonna skip over this and go to this. We're about $9.5 billion in sales. We have operations in 19 countries, 12,000 teammates worldwide. And really, most importantly, there's about 2,000 nerds that I get an opportunity to work with. So I love that part of my job, all right? If you want a copy of this deck, scan that QR code. Happy to send it to y'all, and I'll have all the more detail on all that, and we'll be happy to give you this deck in private or whatever it is. It's awesome. All right, with that, that's all I got. Hopefully this was useful. Appreciate it.